societies. I'll be asking just a few, like 3 questions, so in the meantime you can think of your questions as well. First question, and we can start from Jorge, is what was the hardest thing you had to do to get your project to the stage where it's at now?
The hardest thing would be to basically education, and itself it wasn't as hard, but it was I wasn't starting from zero, right? I was starting with a lot of misinterpretations and a lot of major misinformation campaigns, and I would say then how do you revert almost a decade of misinformation, and you do it by trying to make it as simple as possible, the concept, and as familiar as possible. We've used semantics has been very useful for me in this educational phase, participating in TV, setting up TV campaigns, etc. But for example, in like just simple terms we're all familiar with, like a consent of the governed, that's not like a libertarian or like some fringe concept. This is like in our Constitution, it's in the U.S. Constitution, it's like everywhere. So consent of the governed, instead of like sovereign individual or some other term that's not as familiar. Other things are like instead of private city or free city, which at least the free city term might be familiar in Europe, but here I just talk about decentralization, right? And local government, decentralization, consent of the governed, and then that's what we are. But yeah, that's been the most challenging part. And the political challenges are a consequence of the misinformation campaign that was carried out during multiple years.
So we passed the law on February 19th. And then we issued our press release, and then the war of Ukraine happened. So it was really tough to compete with those news to get the word out there. Then several months later, I think in October, November, when we opened to the public and started receiving or allowing people to create their legal entities, FTX happened. So it was really difficult to try to communicate to people that, well, the differences between what we are doing and just in general the negative perception towards the crypto space, the digital asset space, like educating, like Jorge is saying, the average individual, that it's a process. And like you just said, Jorge, we really have to talk in simple terms, right?
Well, on the side of the Tezos chain itself, the Tezos chain launching has worked pretty flawlessly since then. I think most of the difficulties were around other parts of the Tezos ecosystem, in particular the Tezos Foundation. So it's an entity that resolved only in 2017, and at the time didn't have the governance that it needed to be able to handle that, which created a lot of volatility. And basically, getting to the point where you have the governance, the processes, where you can balance essentially good governance, good procedure, accountability on one hand, but on the other hand, being agile and not being bureaucratic. That's been very difficult to navigate. Also, the way I think of the Tezos Foundation with respect to the Tezos network, for example, is as a wealthy patron. It's an entity that exists out there, and it's a wealthy patron to the network. It just exists on the side of it. But a lot of people look at it almost as a governmental entity, with the expectation that they have of a government. And so you see all the pressures that come with that. The demands for like explaining like, oh, why are you funding this and not that? Why are you who's making this decision? Why? And you see, you basically end up you need to answer to that because there's clearly a demand, but at the same time, combining that and combining the level of agility that you have that you would have in a private company can be extremely difficult to navigate, and we're still navigating it after several years.
Well, I guess the most difficult part, I didn't do it, which was the part of convincing the government to pass the law, and also the work that was done by Prospera at the time, also because Weber was involved in making the law reality. It took a lot of meeting with the government. I was so lucky that I was not part of that, basically a piggyback with this effort. And so in my case, it's just execution. Execution is the easiest job I did in my life, because you compete against the government, which is easier than shooting an ambulance. That's true. I mean, to build an house at $20,000, I can do it very easily. It's not complex. Compared to other business where you compete with private providers, maybe in Honduras they didn't go to Harvard, but they are street smart. They are good. They are. If you play poker with them, you'll end up naked. And so it's pretty easy once you have institutional framework.
So, I mean, we've already talked about negotiating with governments, what have you, but surprisingly, I think maybe our case is kind of particular. It's been difficult to explain what tribes are. And I think it's kind of similar to how initially it was difficult to explain to jump in a stranger's car after calling them on a phone app. People forget about how strange it was to do that, and they thought, oh, I don't want to get shot. Objectively, that's probably what people thought. But the problem is, I mean, what happens is that you develop trust over time, and then people associate with it. And you have sort of that hockey stick type adoption as a consequence of education. But for us, you have to explain, okay, what a special economic zone is, or often do. You have to explain what the status of a tribal government is. And oftentimes you have to talk about that with financial rules regarding digital assets and cryptocurrency and corporate law. So basically right now we're just in an education process to ensure that people understand how this is beneficial and how it can change United States governments.
All right, so maybe we can go this time from left to right. So Joe, what are your most contrarian takes on the industry?
Oh, I already said this one. I think the best place to make a special economic zone is in the United States. Card notes.
Why?
Well, I mean, the difficult part is getting the framework. It's very difficult to do it from a federal framework or from a state framework because a lot of those institutions are very captured. They're very large. But tribes are in the United States, so they have that same jurisdictional authority. But at the same time, the Catawba Indian Nation, there's 3,500 members, and that's actually like a medium-sized tribe. And as a consequence of it, they are being in the United States. For one, the United States is widely regarded as one of the competitive nations in the world to do business, even still. And they might be declining, but they still are. The problem is on the edges of innovative technology. That's where there's some difficulty. But the very basics and strength of the legal code and administration system, they are relatively intact and well respected. The problem is they have rules and regulations that provide lack of clarity and slowness when it comes to innovative rules. So the best of both worlds is to have a nimble regulator that provides clarities for exponential technologies while still being embedded in the United States. And if you have a physical zone, it's even better because then you have access to great human capital. The U.S. still has fantastic universities and research institutions and large Fortune 500 companies. Also, the infrastructure is incredibly good, as well as rapid urbanization. They still have mass migration every single year of high quality migrants, which can improve their labor force. So if they're able to get it right and create a legal framework in the United States, it can be the best. It could easily be the Hong Kong of the world, and hopefully we can get
And wait for contrarian takes from Massimo.
I don't know, but I wanted to say what I think about that. Yes, it would be great. Once I was with Paul Romer, and I said that I would love that this law was in place with the rule of law, like a lot of land, like Australia, Finland, or so. And he told me this phrase, only desperate country do desperate things, which is true. I mean, it happens in countries like this, or Zanzibar, because they are more desperate and they're ready to do things that rich country are not at the level to do in this moment. And so It depends on what you want to do, because if you want to do something for banking, maybe you can do it in the US. But if you want to provide a place in which the people there spend 25% taxes, like the US spent it under Grover Cleveland 120 years ago, you have to get rid of what in the US is federal taxation. I strongly doubt that in the next 30 years there will be a residential zone where you get rid not only of state and municipal taxes, but even federal taxes. I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, can I respond to that? He's probably right on the taxation point. But if you actually look at zone success done by zone studies, you find that successful zones, the determining factor often isn't taxes. It's actually making sure you have the best business environment. So I agree, taxes is probably not going to be addressed. But if you can address other aspects, then you can have a more successful zone.
So I'm not an expert in this space, but if I had a controversial contrarian take, is that I've been, I was in the Rotten conference in 2011, so I've been following this for a while. My conclusion though is I think sovereignty doesn't buy you as much as I think it bought you back in the days. Part of the problem is that you can set up a better regulatory environment, but ultimately you are going to want to run businesses, and those businesses have to serve customers. And the trend essentially now is that you have to abide by the rules and regulation of where your customers are going to live. So, in the case of crypto regulation, you can look at the difference between China and the US. And China has repressive regulation against currency, but the Chinese government sees that their job to stop their citizens from using it. The US government sees it as your job to prevent US people from using whatever service. So the way they see it is like, well, we don't care where you operate, whatever you're doing. If someone in the US is using it and you once transited through the airport in Atlanta and opened your laptop, clearly the Southern District of New York is a rest jurisdiction to discuss this matter. And there's a lot of businesses which can live with that. And, for example, medical tourism that can work because essentially the person travels there. But if you want to be a big financial center, for example, if you want to have web vacation, whatever you're doing, it gets really tricky. And I think the trend is to have a lot more collusion between states. We've seen a lot of governments in the world pass the minimum tax law. There's a lot more collusion that's happening, and I think it's going to be harder and harder to do jurisdictional arbitrage. So I think it exists, but it's a lot less powerful than I used to think it was. I still think the separate things, I still think it can help a lot of local businesses, like the charter cities and start cities. If you don't necessarily think of it as like, haha, I'm bringing business in from all over the world because now I'm in this environment. But if you focus more on like local businesses who are serving local population, who can actually relocate in that zone, potentially that's more fruitful.
My contrarian view is along the lines of the last thing you said. I do think I do think territory is very important, and I'm a bit bullish on layer 1 versus layer 2 startup society, what we were talking about yesterday. I do think that if you want to grow a community that that lasts generations, you do have to have some form of permanent link to a territory, whether that's as an individual or as a network of individuals. So I think that's like my most contrarian view for this conference, which is territory matters. And that can be your legal person, your natural person, your multiple legal persons. Territory, territory matters. Even for decentralized, deterritorialized governance and communities.
Yeah. So in my case, I think that, I think that the world, we're going to see a lot of special economic zones, and they're going to be very successful, and they're going to be very nice, and they're going to create a lot of opportunity. But I think that what happened in Honduras is quite unique, And I think that, which is essentially the ability for private parties to reclaim, taking over 80% of governance functions, and really opening the governance market. Like that's what the CEDES did. It allowed in 7 departments of Honduras to private parties to access the governance market and then be the engines and the motors. And I think this is unique globally. And I also think that if it doesn't work here, or we're not able to make it successful, then it's really going to be a problem worldwide. So I think that this is the best shot we have, and we have to make it succeed. And if it doesn't succeed here, it's going to be a problem. But if it succeeds here, then we can successfully export this model to everywhere in the world. We make it work here, we can make it work everywhere in the world. But that's my view. Like, it has to work here. We have to make it work here, and the whole community has to make it work in Honduras. And once we make it work here, then I'm sure we're going to be able to export this model across the world.
Do we have any audience questions?
All right, here's a tough one. What's some time that you were removed from a community, and how do you think could be handled better from perhaps your personal experiences, so you can try and incorporate that into these sorts of groups that you're making?
Person?
Daniel.
I can take this. I don't spend time in Morazan now. I go 4 or 5 times per year for many reasons. And I see that we are failing with services. The small service we have, the electricity to the provider, the Airbnb, small teams. And you have to be careful with this, because jurisdiction and laws and whatever, but then you have to deliver a product to the client. For example, given that Eric is here, we'll repeat this. When I went in my room yesterday, there was no water, and you cannot drink water in Honduras because you get diarrhea. And the reception was closed. I mean, this is probably a $400 hotel, and you cannot get a bottle of water. That's a stupid mistake that you cannot do. So there is all the nice part, let's say complex, the diverse part that you have to do, but then you have to execute. Whatever you do, it must work. And I have the same problem in Morazan, because I don't spend time there. We have to be careful with this. It's an important part of the service.
This question's for Jorge. You suggested that this idea of ZEDES is replicatable. I lived in the state of New Hampshire for the Free State Project for 15 years. And when I talk to people about the Free State Project, they would be, wow, this is a great idea. And they'd immediately begin to think about replicatability. Maybe we could do this in my state. Well, you can't do the Free State Project in South Carolina if you don't first do it in New Hampshire. Now, if you're going to replicate the program, I mean, doing something different is something different. In the case of ZEDES, it took 14 years to go from the start of the idea to just buying the land here for Prospero. And there's a lot of work and ups and downs and communist governments and all those things in between. I wonder about the replicatability and whether we really need to win here first before we even think about replicatability. What your thoughts are on that?
No, I mean, I think, again, there's going to be a lot of zones across the world that are going to be very successful. A lot of zones are going to be very successful. They're going to catalyze prosperity. They're going to make the world a better place. But the level of autonomy that you get here in Honduras under the ZEDES regime, I have not seen it. I've seen it in some zones, like, for example, in Hong Kong, but that's not really replicable, right? Like you're saying. The ZEDES model, what was most innovative of it, is that it allowed you to get the autonomy of Hong Kong essentially on demand. If you are a private party in any of the coastal departments of Honduras, then under the set of framework, you could just create that local government and enjoy that 80% autonomy on governance functions. So my point is that this is a special model. It's like a different model, and so I think it's the first and maybe the only country in the world that has approved something like that. And so that's why I think that's essentially to get a special regime or like something to really open the governance market to private parties and really make governance competitive. You need something like a set of regime. So I think this is the best thing that has been deployed to achieve that objective. So we better make it successful for it to become replicable. And precisely because of what you're mentioning, of all the challenges, precisely that is what we have to make it successful. Because if we're not, then the rest of the world is going to think, it was a good idea, but too much problem, didn't work out, so let's not do it. And then you're stuck with very successful zones, but that, in my view, don't really open up the governance market for private sector type level competition. So that's what I think it's super key that we make it happen here and be successful in the long term.
Final question. Yes?
I disagree. If we look at the history, the trajectory of the different political regimes, political systems, we come from, well, not we, and I'm going to do a super simplification here, but the size of the territory has been shrinking, no? Empires, nation states, and now we are definitely heading towards a more local world, and we add there a layer of digital, right? So I definitely see that the world that we are all helping to create is hierarchical. And just like life, many of these experiments or types of communities, type societies, are emerging simultaneously in multiple parts of the world as a network. So I don't think that if one fails, it's the end of it. It's the tendency, and whether Prospera, hopefully not, or not fails, I don't think that's going to be the end for the movement. I just think there's no way back. This is going to be the next stage of governance. Woo.
That's very powerful. In the interest of time, I just have a final question. So who does each of you want to give a shout out, kudos, or gratitude to?
To the Vitalia team. It's
Thank you.
And to Prospera also for hosting.
To the entire justice community for making the chain in the ecosystem what it is today.
Because you will have direct profit for this, but you did personally dedicate a lot of time and did a great job. Prosper is fortunate to have you as an evangelist. I'm fortunate to have Alex, and Prosper should be happy to have you.
I'd like to thank our sponsors. No, but seriously, the core team, they've been absolutely fantastic. Nick, everything in Vitalia, this is the easiest conference I've ever run in my entire life, and I'm serious about that because of all this wonderful infrastructure and groundwork that's been done. I can't thank enough to all these fantastic speakers. You're all freaking fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to make it work, and thank you for all the attendees that came and that brought so much good energy and are gonna, I know, do absolutely fantastic things.
Jorge.
No, I really have to say the attendees, but not only for being here. I mean, I live here in Roatan, I live in Pristine Bay, so I see it every day, but really this past month has been quite special. and you're all so creative. Like I see the list of events and everybody adding their own programs, and just the community, the Prosper, looks so live, so alive, so productive, so beautiful. So it has to be the attendees and to their creativity and to the community that I'm seeing for being here, and I think just it's amazing. So a big shout out to all of you.
I'd also like to have a shout out to both Alex and Massimo for being the best Startup Societies couple there is.
The problem of a small relationship. Don't think about it.
Thank you to all the panelists.